Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of this video series on Rational Reporting for Development Intelligence, or RRDI as it's commonly known. This series of videos is intended to provide an overview of what is RRDI, how it's put together, what's in it, the data flows, and really focus in on the demo part on how to install it, and then get it configured and working with CLM. So now we'll be moving into the new demo for part 2, which will be to actually configure the system to make it workable. And that uses a setup application, which is really patterned after the JTS setup. So we'll start the setup server and then get into setup itself to do the actual configuration. So let's get on with it. So now we're ready to set up and configure the RRDI system that we had installed in the previous video. I need to start the setup server. If you remember, I described that. So let me go to All Programs, Rational Reporting, and you see Start the IBM Rational Reporting setup server. So let me start that. Okay, that took a minute or so. As you can see, the setup server is now starting. Now what we have started at this point, as I've described in the previous video, is a dedicated Tomcat and Jazz server that run the setup application, just like they have it for JTS setup. So I can minimize that window. And now I have to run a script to register the application with the Jazz server. So I've got a command window here already navigated to the correct directory. So the name of the script is server.config. So I can run that. And it's now the first question it's asking me is looking for the full DNS name of this system. And it's important to get this right, because just like with Jazz, there's no going back, you can't redo it. So I've got a little notepad thing here, okay, with some answers that I'm going to need as we go through setup, and you'll be seeing me refer to this again. And it's a good idea to have something like this. So anyway, the name of the system is here, so I can enter that. And now it's looking for me to supply a username and password that I can use to log into the setup server. And for that, I'm going to use setup admin as both the username and the password. It can really be anything you want, but that's the one I'm going to use. And the password is the same. Okay, now we just have to let the script run. Okay, the script has completed. But basically what this did was register the setup application with the dedicated Jazz server and do some configuration on that Jazz server. So anyway, we're done there. So now let's get into the actual setup. I can bring up a browser and go to the reporting setup, which I've got bookmarked here. Okay, so it's got the URL of the setup server here. Now I need to enter my credentials that I had created during the script, which was setup admin, and register. Okay, so now getting a login prompt from the Jazz server itself. Do this one more time. And I get the authorization question. I'm going to click yes to enable them to communicate. Okay, so here we have the main setup screen from the setup application. And there are several scenarios that we can run through here. There's the setup rational reporting scenario, which is the one we're going to use. Another one for some post-setup tasks, some things you might want to do after you're done. And I'll be getting a little more into that in the third video in this series. Some upgrade-related scenarios, and then also some what we call common tasks, which are things that you might want to do not part of a scenario, which typically has a sequence of steps to it, but just an individual task, and we'll be using this load Cognos archives task later on. But anyway, let's start up the setup rational reporting. So you can see the page here looks very much like the Jazz setup, and that was done very intentionally, obviously, and uses a lot of the same application code to implement this. So for database vendor, we're going to use DB2. Here are the options: Oracle, SQL Server. We'll go with DB2. And the location of the JDBC files. Okay, for the JDBC driver location, I have that here, and it's pretty much a standard place. And then we've got this note here that the database connection requires a 32-bit database client, even on a 64-bit machine like we have now, and that's a requirement actually mandated by Cognos. And this is just a note to certify that you understand that, so we can click that we verified that, and then click copy. And you see the driver was copied successfully, so we've completed this step. So now we can go on next. Okay, now we complete the content store database. The host is localhost because it's on this machine. It could be on another machine if we want. Port, we've already created the RICM database in the last video, and see RICM is the standard name for that, the default name, so we're going with that. Database administrator is DB2 admin. The password. Okay, and the table space location can really be any folder you want it to be. Just needs some space to write the data, so I've set up this directory on my C drive for it, so we'll just put that in here as DB2 RRDI table spaces. So we'll just click validate, and now it'll go validate that it can access the database correctly. So it says, okay, it can access it, but it does not meet the requirements, and you need to run a script to do it. And that's what we expected to happen, because all we did was create the database. So you can either run those now if you want to, have setup do it for you, or if you'd prefer, you can have setup save the scripts to a directory, so that way you can look at them and verify what it is they're going to do. But we'll just go ahead and run them. And this will take a little bit. Actually, no, it doesn't. It's completed already, so database is successfully prepared, so we can go on to the next step, which is a similar step here, but now for the data warehouse, which is the database that will be used to gather information from the CLM and report on it. So again, the name by default is RIDW, database administrator, DB2 admin, password. Okay, the table spaces, this location, I can use the same one as before, so I just paste that in again. Okay, now the report username. This is the name of the account that Cognos will be able to use to query the data warehouse to get data during report execution. I'll try that and validate it. Okay, so you see the database already exists, which is fine because it does. So we're all set here. We'll just click next. Okay, now to configure the application server profile, this creates the structures in WebSphere. So now we need to know the location of where WebSphere is on the system. So again, that's one of the things you should have, a piece of necessary information. So we'll just copy this. Do not want to use an existing profile. We'll take the default profile name of Rational Reporting, and for the port to access this on, I always like to use 9084 because I know there's no conflicts there. So we'll just validate the port. Okay, and you can see that the port and the directory were successfully validated. We're okay there. So now we have an option to enable administrative security in WebSphere. Typically you would want to do that. However, to keep things simple, in this case I'm not going to. Okay, now create the application server file. There's an option to recreate if one with the same name already exists. Yeah, so I'll just leave that checked just in case, and let it go. Okay, as you can see, all 3 steps here have completed successfully, so our application server profile is now set up, ready to go, so we'll click Next. Okay, now we need to configure user authentication. Now RRDI typically authenticates through your CLM Jazz server, so you don't have to maintain duplicate LDAPs or user databases. So before we can do this, however, there are some fields here that CLM and RRDI will use to authenticate each other that we need to get, and they need to be configured first in the CLM service. So to do that, I'm going to open a new tab on my browser. So we'll get into JTS administration here. Okay, so now I'm going to log in with my CLM credentials, which are different. Okay, and under the server tab, we need to go to consumers inbound, and we'll be adding another one of these consumers. So the name is going to be com.ibm.rational.reporting, because that's what CLM will look for that. Now I need to enter a secret, and this is like a password, and don't forget what it is because there's no display for it. So you have to remember that. And retype it. And yes, it is trusted, and it's important to check that it's trusted. So we can click register, and you see now this row exists here. So let me go back to the setup tab, and we have to enter the URI for our Jazz server, which is going to be this string. Copy that. Paste it. Jazz server username. Jazz team server password. Okay, and here it's looking for the consumer key, the OAuth consumer key. And this was created for us when we just set up the COM IBM Rational Reporting. So it is this string here. And let me copy that. It's obviously not really feasible to type it. Let me paste that in here. And then the secret I had specified. And let's validate. Okay, it's validated successfully. So now we can enable the Jazz namespace to be used for RRDI authentication. That's done pretty quick and completed successfully. So I'll go on to the next step. Okay, now we have to, last step here is to build and deploy the components. This is going to produce your file and deploy that into the WebSphere profile we had previously created. Now the context root we do want to be /reporting. Now the other option here is to copy Cognos documents to the application server. I am going to deselect that, so I'll click deploy. Okay, the deploy has finished successfully, as you can see. So we'll go on to next. And as you can see from the list of tasks, that was the last task. So now we have the summary page. And finally, we can click finish, which takes us back to the basic scenario selection page. So that completes the setup of RRDI. So that completes part 2 of the RRDI setup video series. During this session, we started the setup server, we configured the setup application to run with it, and we went through the new setup application to get RRDI configured, up and running. So now we'll move on in the next video to actually load reports and run them and show the access through CLM. Thank you.